my family of origin is Italian, right? We didn't really grow up with whiskey at home. My parents basically bought whiskey as a gift for our accountant at the end of the year. That was it. That was my kind of exposure to whiskey growing up. But being Italian, like food is like every Italian mother's love language. And so, the dinner table was really important to us. And so when I started Starwood, of course, I love drinking whiskey after dinner and kind of just sitting with, a few fingers of whiskey, contemplating the world's woes. But equally, I wanted to make something that we could have before dinner and during dinner as well. So, twofold is kind of like the Swiss Army knife of Australian whiskey because it mixes really well, like because of our aging in wine barrels. It's 60% wheat. And if any of you are really curious about what wheat whiskey tastes like, come to the distillery. We've got a couple of single barrels on the back bar that are really cool and interesting kind of expressions of that wheat component. 60% wheat and 40% single malt, and the 40% is basically Nova. So really versatile, great as a mixer, but funnily enough, it's the hardest whiskey to make at Starward. If you think about aging in red wine barrels, winemakers use a whole heap of different types of wood policies to kind of age their whiskeys. French oak, American oak, different size barrels, different varietals of grapes, different toasting levels, a number of vintages that they use them. And so when you factor all of that out, there's about 144 different types of barrels that go into making twofold. And the fun thing about that is that, we could release a single barrel every week from Starwood and still not come back to the same type of barrel that goes into making twofold after 3 years. So it's pretty cool to kind of have that sort of depth and complexity. It's one of the reasons why it's so consistent is we've got so much complexion to play with. But really good, sessionable, approachable starting whiskey, lots of fruit on the nose, soft and creamy, just delicious. Great way to start the night.
Yeah.
Kind of wet the palate.
I remember doing a tour talking with Jared, and he was saying the amount of combinations of different style of barrels, and it was unbelievable compared to one second fill, third fill, well, let me refill all the different kinds of woods that you have. Um, yeah, it's pretty impressive having that availability, in your hands. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
also Nova being one of the very first whiskeys, I would say, in Australia that was openly promoted as a whiskey for blending, as at the beginning. Sorry, for mixing, as to begin with, as Australian whiskey, right?
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, I just came back from a trip to Taipei, and as soon as you say this whiskey can be mixed, everybody thinks it's cheap whiskey.
Yeah.
But if we had to scorecard every whiskey in the distillery based on the awards and the points that it scored, Twofold would win, like by a long margin over Nova, Solera, 100 proof, or Fortis, the single barrels. It is very, like funnily enough, like I said, it's the hardest to make. We've got so many barrels to kind of blend in to making it. It's wheat and single malt, which is really special and interesting and provides different complexion.
Yeah.
But it's just amazing, amazing, amazing quality as well. So it does everything. Like I said, it's a great Swiss Army knife. You can introduce friends to Australian whiskey, and say, I bet you've never tasted anything like this before.
Yeah.
If they're into whiskey, but equally, if people aren't necessarily, if they're new to whiskey and starting to explore the category, and they're kind of straddling a bit of bourbon, a bit of Scotch, a bit of Irish, what a great way to kind of introduce them to Australian whiskey as well.
So one question I have for about twofold, for example, is that the choice of wheat,
Mm.
which is very unusual, but I think is very smart, right? Because they probably the obvious thought on blending is to use corn because it's widely available, pretty much everywhere around the world. It's a lot cheaper. Why wheat? Which is I love that is wheat. You know, I much prefer distilled wheat and distilled corn myself as a spirit.
There's
Yeah.
two fundamental reasons. The first is that I love wheated bourbons. Like my favorite bourbons actually Maker's Mark. One of my favorites is Maker's. Obviously, all of the heritage collection at Buffalo Trace Distillery in the Sazerac portfolio has got a lot of wheat component. Think Weller and Pappy Van Winkle. So that, you know, and why do I love them? They're soft, round, creamy, a little bit of spice to the spirit. And particularly aging whiskey in wine barrels, a really good canvas. We're using a painting analogy to kind of start with, to then kind of highlight those fruit characteristics that come from red wine. But the other thing, Jose, and I'm sure the rest of the team will say the same thing, right? A whiskey talks to the place it's made, right?
Yeah.
And what do we grow a lot of in Australia? Wheat and
Yeah.
malted and barley,
Yeah.
right? And so this is, in my view, like just a reflection of the place it's made. A great whiskey, just like bourbon, they grow a lot of corn, right? Makes sense that they're using corn. And in Scotland, the same sort of thing is the reason why they're kind of single malts are so kind of revered over there. Is back in the day, all of it was from Scotland, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And this whiskey as well, I think it's pretty special. We've
Yeah.
started with this tonight, even though it isn't really part of the core tasting, because this is probably, if you ask me, what is the quintessential Australian whiskey? It's this one, and
Yeah.
it's been on back bars for a decent amount of time, and it's the one that's kind of pretty synonymous with an Australian whiskey in the sense that it's had enough exposure and it's on a lot of back bars, but it's just something that's probably projected Australian whiskey on a global stage more than any other whiskey, and I think it's pretty special.
Then you're someone that knows a lot of that likes facts and things. Is twofold the first blended whiskey after how long in Australia that's created here? Like 100% Australian. Is it one of the first ones after a very long time of not,
Yeah, I mean, Corio was the only real distillery for a long time, right? So we're going back into maybe the 40s or 50s, I'm guessing, like when Federal
Yeah.
had all of those distilleries that they were not far from where we are in Port Melbourne, actually, and blending from that point of view. I don't know whether there was some, I don't know whether there was any other kind of whiskies. Certainly the single malt distilleries, like we were distillery number 10, whiskey
Yeah.
distillery number 10 in Australia.
Yeah.
And the 9 before us were very much focused on single malt.
Yeah.
And, I don't think that anyone else is kind of focused on that. Like, I mean, you've got Whippersnapper that was doing like the 4-grain mash.
Yeah.
And Tiger Snake from Western Australia was doing the same sort of thing. But yeah, we were kind of really just I wanted to kind of think of the drinker first and not the makers, and so perversely, I think I had a hard time convincing the team internally that like making a wheat and single malt whiskey is totally okay, and that like actually if we want to meet the drinker where they're at in the journey, and that there's a lot of new whiskey drinkers along for the ride that are kind of exploring the category, that this is going to be right up their alley. And that for every one single malt whiskey Starward drinker that we might have lost because for whatever reason they thought that this wasn't the distillery that they thought we were, we'd be getting 10 new whiskey drinkers that would fall in love with the brand and everything that we do.
Yeah, and I think as what they call an acquiring product, it's fantastic, right? This is people that bring it's a whiskey that just brings people into your umbrella and the category too, right?
So that's as we go through the tasting tonight, we'll feel free if you've got a question for anybody, throw it in the chat.
Yeah.
But you're also just welcome to take yourself off mute and ask anything at any time as well. But at the end, we'll probably have a little bit more time for back and forth between everyone as well. So starting on a bit of twofold, but we do have a pretty special Starwood single cask here. And Dave's already worded us up. It's pretty rare for us to be trying this one in Australia. So special to have something that most of you guys probably wouldn't have tried before. And being a single red wine cask from Starwood, I think it's a really nice representation of what Dave and the team do.
So this is a cask selected by the Nectar, which is a distribution company in Belgium. So we basically import all the independent bottlings that they do, and they emailed me because they had some Starwood, and of course, I remember the head buyer there maybe like 6 years ago or something like that, asking me about Starwood, and I said, hey, good. And or maybe like, yeah, it would have been 4, maybe 5 years ago, asked me, well, they offered me a few barrels, said you should buy some. I said, okay. And then after this was released, he sent me an email, said, we got some, do you want any? I said, of course. And that's the story how these bottles end up in the store. So they left here to Belgium, and then they came back to Australia. So if you see this little bit of price, yeah, they is the shipping to Europe and back. But it's also the treat to have something that they were saying is quite special.
This is like I can name 4 different ways this is super rare, right? The first is if you just look at the label, 54.8% ABV is pretty rare for us. So we fill our casks at 55% ABV. They typically go up about 0.5% a year. So being, at sea level in Melbourne's 4 seasons in a day environment, we lose as much water as we do alcohol. So for this to have come down a little is quite surprising as a single barrel, number one. Number two, if you had to describe Starwood in one word, it would be fruity, right? That would be the word. I don't think we're kind of surprising anyone with that. And this is not fruity, right? Really interesting on the nose. I can tell you right now that this was basically a single malt whiskey destined to be Nova. It was 2.5 years old, and then we finished it in a barrel. Anyone want to guess what type of barrel we might have finished this single barrel in?
Well, we know it's a red wine cask, right?
Yeah, but it's finished.
Finished in something heavily peated.
Lagavulin.
Yeah. So this is one of the single barrels of the Lagavulin release. That
I gotta take it offline.
that made it to Belgium as a single barrel. Now, the reason why we didn't put Lagavulin on the barrel, on the bottle, or even spoke about peated, because obviously at the time that we sent this to Belgium, we didn't know whether we'd have permission from Diageo and the team at Lagavulin to say that the whiskey's a Lagavulin. So you might recall that when we first started doing peated finishes, the first release was called Unexpeated.
Yeah.
Because it's very unexpected for Starwood to do a peated cask. Lovely wordplay there that didn't really translate well into any other market apart from Australia.
The label where it says that it was transferred to in December 2020 to Scottish peated cask.
Yep. And so that's not uncommon, to kind of do a peated finish. The second release we did was called Peated Finish, right? We went from unexpeated to peated finish. And actually, this is from that batch. This is from that batch of the second releases. And then obviously last year we launched the Lagavulin collaboration. It was the first time in the history of Lagavulin that they publicly acknowledged and had their word mark on another whiskey with an E, without an E, from anywhere in the world on someone else's label. So it was a bit of a world's first to have Lagavulin on Starwood's label with that beautiful green color.
That was amazing. Yeah.
Someone just commented it's kind of interesting to start. No, you've never started the night on peat before. Who wants to guess how many parts per million there is in this cask of peat in the spirit, not in the malt, obviously, because that's just the finish. I'll give you some reference points.
Am I allowed to know? Maybe.
Like Lagavulins, about 15 to 18 parts per million. Taliska's around about 10 in the spirit, in the actual spirit.
Yeah.
Anyone want to have a guess? Don't be shy. We're all friends. 2.
Sarah says 2.
12, 5, 6.
5, 6, says Ben.
Yep.
What do you think, Jono?
I mean, I would think a little bit more, maybe around the 10 to 15, but I don't know.
What's the number? What's the magic number, Dave?
All right. Final calls anymore?
Final call. Going to once.
Right, I'm calling it. So Ben was the closest. It's actually 2 parts per million. I'm not including Sarah. Of course, Sarah knows.
Yeah.
Wow.
2 parts per million, but it goes a long way, right? Like that PE characteristic goes a hell of a long way in a finish. And part of that reason is because you've got the light and shade of those red wine barrel fruits alongside those peated characteristics. It was finished for 18 months. So 2.5 years in a red wine barrel.
Yeah.
And 1.5 years in the Lagavulin barrels.
Also, when we describe like peat and the phenol level, right? Everyone maybe thinks like it's just like a unit, right? But the phenol is the way to measure that compound, which there's many compounds that have phenol, and even like 2 different casks with 2 parts per million will have a different amount of peat perception, because those compounds, they all have different, let's say, strengths, if that makes sense, right? So could be a 2% that you don't even notice it, or a 2% that is quite prominent, but it's still the same amount.
Yeah, totally. And we've gone from twofold and also a really fruity cocktail to a little bit of peat, which I kind of like in a way, because it started the little bit of peat there was accentuated. And the more it opens up, the more we get into it, the more you start to see spice and a little bit more of that traditional Starwood tropical fruit note. It's behind there, but you know, if you put this later at the end, then you might not see the peat as strongly as we see it after a bit of a fruity drink in the 2-year-old. So it's great to start with a bit of peat, and it's got a bit of that Starwood DNA in there for me for sure. That fruitiness. Mandarin and tropical fruits, pineapples, but it's definitely that spice that's really starting to come.
Also these whiskeys that we've chosen, they all have a very also it's a horizontal tasting. Basically, you can switch around them and they won't overlap to each other.
Yeah.
Right. So
all different styles, all
very
different sort of whiskeys, and that's what's pretty special. So
yeah. And so these are standard American sort of like size barrels, so like 200, 220 size, barriques, if we're using wine terminology, your standard size barrels. And I spoke to the master blender at Lagavulin, and we launched the whiskey in New York for the United States market, and he was pretty confident that this was all 16-year-old stock.
Wow.
Couldn't guarantee it, but it was like more than likely.
Nice. So where these Lagavulin barrels come from? You got like did it just come from a generic broker, or you guys as part of this?
From Diageo directly.
What do you mean? But you guys deal directly with you got like a Distilled Ventures or sort of the Diageo contact to get sold these kind of casks, or it will be like a generic broker?
Oh no, it wasn't a generic, because a generic broker needs to waive, like they need to kind of basically say we won't tell our customers where they came from.
But they come with a mark that says Lagavulin or something.
Actually, they don't. Interestingly, right? Because they know they go to secondary and tertiary.
Yeah.
But the These were direct from Diageo. We obviously through Distill Ventures have a great relationship with the team there. They love Starward because we can do things that they could only dream of doing, both because we're by their standards a baby distillery, like we're like a dollhouse distillery compared to some of their distilleries, but also because our regulations mean we can kind of take whiskey for walks that they're just not allowed to do.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And actually, this whiskey is sensational.
It's cracking. I mean, and for this, I think we got, a dozen bottles in Australia. We don't have many left. I'll put the link in the chat there if somebody wants to snap up the last bottle. And we do have a code for tonight, Aussie whiskey, which I'll put in there as well. And if you use that on checkout for any items, not just what you're trying tonight, but anything else as well, you get a 10% discount. And for a lot of these, for these whiskies we're trying whiskies that have won big awards, that are small releases. So we might not have them available in our shop, but we encourage you to go directly to the producers, go to Dave, Johnny, go to Lee, go to Tim, and purchase them off their website, or the most recent sort of similar release they've got, because no doubt everything that's going around is absolutely stunning. But there's a code for tonight, and this probably won't last long, the bottle that's online there. Dave, thanks so much for joining us for the focus part of the Starward tasting. If you're still about as we go through, we'll definitely come back and chat and see how this whiskey develops as the tasting goes on as well.
We always go back.
Yeah, can't wait to taste the others.
Thank you, mate.
Amazing. So, well, now we head down to Tasmania, where we're going to spend a bit of time tonight, and we head to Transportation Whisky, to Johnny Holton and his beautiful pot still whiskies, emulating that Irish style whiskey here in Australia. Incredibly unique in the Australian whiskey industry. We've tried nothing like it before, and as well as the whiskey being incredible, you're a top bloke as well, Johnny. So really excited to try this whiskey tonight, and for everybody that hasn't given it a whirl before to give it a chance. So if you've got your transportation and you haven't already, pour yourself a dram. How are you, Johnny?
Yeah, good, mate. Sorry, I just froze through all of that, so I didn't hear any of that.
I was just saying awful things about you.
Oh, good thing. Oh, perfect. I wouldn't know if you're lying.
No, just talking it up, mate. Saying how cracking it is, and obviously on in terms of the tasting tonight, we're talking about sort of making a mark on the global stage. You're taking this new style of whiskey that's never really been done too much in Australia, the pot still, emulating that Irish style into the market and getting massive accolades, mate. So first of all, congratulations, and love to hear a little bit about the story of Transportation for those who might not know as much about it, and about this beautiful whiskey we're trying tonight as well.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Yeah, so I collected and drank whiskies for many, many years. I only started collecting because I was buying quicker than I was drinking. But yeah, one of my trips to Ireland, it was all exclusive Irish whiskey. My family history was Irish, and my grandma liked Irish whiskey. I just kind of fell into a love of Irish whiskey early, so I drank exclusively Irish whiskey. So once I was over in Ireland at Middleton Distillery, I was actually drinking a Method and Madness 28-year-old Ruby Port, because single pot still was my favourite style of whiskey, and I decided, why is no one in Australia producing single pot still whiskey? So I turned to my wife. I said, I'm going back and I'm going to make Australia's first single pot still whiskey. And so I did it. I came back, started at the bottom, got a job in the industry at a distillery, worked my way up, ended up managing a distillery down here for close to a year and a half, and doing quality control and things like that. And then started making Transportation Whisky, which I named it Transportation Whisky because I have Irish ancestry, and some of them did receive transportation. That's how they were sent to Van Diemen's Land. And so I thought, if I'm making Irish style whiskey in Tasmania, I should have a little tribute to how my family ended up here and why I wasn't making Irish whiskey in Ireland.
Yeah, 100%.
That's a very cool
It's a
story.
great story, and obviously we've enjoyed sort of getting to know transportation whiskey over the last couple of years, and
Yeah.
trying them's been exceptional. You've got a really interesting series of releases, and the one we're trying tonight is probably a little bit of a back catalogue in a way. We've got the Tosses, which is part of your band collaboration series. Bourbon finished in Irish stout. I'll let you tell us about it because it's a cracking drink.
Tell us everything. Tell us from the bottle design, which is absolutely brilliant. You know, label, everything.
Actually,
Well, I wanted to do a bottle design.
I was
No,
gonna
I can't hear.
I was gonna say, can you start at the beginning, like right at like grains, like because I think that single pot still distillation is so unique, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's worth kind of highlighting how.
Well, this is why I like single pot still whiskey so much. Like, you know, single malt is fantastic. I love many single malts, but I just as you know, as you was talking about with wheat before, Dave, that you can get so many different textures and flavors out of other grains. And to be able to play around with different ratios, and as a maker as well, not using the same grain day in day out, which there's nothing wrong with. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here bagging out on single malt. There is, I made that for a long time myself, and I think it's enjoy the process of trying.
We're losing him.
Trying all these different grains at different ratios, you can find CO changes. And I'm predominantly working with wheat, rye, and oats as my adjunct grains. And you know, oats adds this a full-on creaminess. You do get a creaminess from wheat, and maybe a bit more sweetness, and that green hay flavors from that as well. But the oats, I find, really do add a lot of creaminess and Anzac biscuit flavors coming through there as well. Rye, of course, I've only used that in small percentages, say 5% with 15%.
We are losing Johnny for a little bit. We are losing you. We're not going to make you walk out.
It's 40% malt and 40% view. Gives you barley.
We're losing you every now and then.
Sorry.
Now we're losing you every now and then.
Just a tiny bit, though.
A little bit.
It's still perfect because we can catch most of it, and I mean that's expected at Tassie Wi-Fi, so it's okay.
Yeah, our telephones with cans with strings attached not long ago. So
this is because I didn't get it. Maybe everyone else didn't get it. So this is malt and single pot, no grain in here.
No, so single pot still in Ireland means to call it single pot still in Ireland, it has to be a minimum 30% raw barley.
Yeah.
A minimum of 30% malted barley. And it was always 5% since Pernod Ricard made that rule. Oh, I should say the Irish Whisky Association.
Yeah.
They're not the same. They're not the same thing. And that's currently changing to 30%. So I've always run with under the 30% rule, but we don't have any rules here. I can go any amounts that I'd like to do, but
maybe you can. If I'm wrong, as I was saying, that answering the question there, what's single pot? And this is like a short story, long story short.
Long story short, just mixed grain mash bill with certain percentages that you have to.
You're going too technical. The
to
English
use.
charging tax.
Jose's doing the short story of pot still.
The English were charging tax on malted barley. So the
that's the tiddly D story. That's not actual fact because.
Oh, okay, good to know.
No, I mean people were using other grains and unmalted barley before the tax was put in.
Yeah.
So I know, you know, there's the fantasy story, which sounds great, and we'll go with it, that this clever Irish tricked the English by using unmalted barley in their mash bill. But there is records. Fionnán O'Connor has found lots of records of Irish mash bills that predate that tax, and they were using unmalted barley and other grains then. So,
Why?
but
They just were lazy. They didn't want to malt it all. No.
I think they were. You'd use whatever you could get at some places. Some places were deliberately doing it.
Yeah.
Some places were doing it because you do get different textures and flavors.
Yep.
Other places were doing it what you can get your hand on at the time.
Or because it could be cheaper. Malted barley would be a lot more expensive than unmalted barley.
Yeah, you'd. I mean, again, like the old records show that some places, even if they were doing their own malting, they were deliberately doing it to get different textures, flavors. They had set mash bills for certain distilleries throughout the years. I've got a list. Fionnán O'Connor, if you can get hold of his book, and he's got another one coming out in the next couple of years. He's done his PhD on Irish whiskey history, has found so many of these old historic mash bills, where they were made, what years they were made. And I'm currently working through most of those down here in Tasmania to because I love history, and I love trying all these different things with the grains and the whiskies. So I've been running through these old, what they're calling historic mash bills.
Wow.
1916 recipes, 1952 Dublin recipes.
What's 9 and 52? The ratio?
1952 I think Jamison were actually running it out of Bow Street at the time, which was a fun, just all these different mash bills that he's found in the historic records of different grain ratios. So different ratios of different grains, and I've been trying them out to make different whiskies and checking out what the differences are with the spirit and all the way through. It's a lot of fun, and it's been making some pretty phenomenal whiskies. So, and I've been comparing it in Ireland with other distilleries over there that are doing the same thing.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
It's really cracking and really, really stunning whiskey. The nose is really interesting, of course, beautiful. There's, I think, that sort of like tobacco leaf, but then there's a bit of, a little bit of spice there as well. But the palate's what I really love about this whiskey. It's very textural, very sort of creamy mouthfeel to it. And I suppose that's probably pretty concurrent to a lot of your spirits as well.
Toasted brand. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this one was 10. I had 10% oats in this one. There was a 30% raw unmalted, which gives that little bit of spice that you're talking about. And
10%
the rest was
like the cereal oats.
Sorry?
10% oats, you said?
Yes, 10% oats in this one. So on the back of the bottle, I've always got the mash bill. I don't know if you can see that. So it'll say...
Oh, yeah, 10% oats, 30% unmalted barley, 60% malted barley.
Yep.
Wow.
And then I'll also have the maturation process. So this one was bourbon, finished in...
Irish stout and Irish red ale.
Yeah, they can't really... I'm sure they're not watching this. So it was Guinness and Kilkenny, but I couldn't write that on the... I couldn't write that on the label.
We'll write it on there now on ours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I seasoned some XPX casks with Guinness and Kilkenny for quite a few months. I then decanted that. We drank the beer at a couple of tastings, and then I bottled the rest of it, and then I transferred the bourbon ex-bourbon cask SPS into those. Well, I guess you call them the 50/50s of Guinness and Kilkenny.
The 50/50s.
Yeah. Sounds like a crack.
Yeah, it's some people call it a black and tan, but
yeah, black and tan. That's what I know. Yes, I know the black and tan. With the
yeah,
that's
not what it's called in Ireland. due to history. So I just call it a half and half.
What do you do with all that beer?
Sorry.
What do you do with all that beer?
It was consumed. It was about, I'd say it was about a 10% version of a half and half. Maybe a bit higher, actually, to be honest.
That's fantastic. That is, yeah.
That sounds like a good way to do it.
That's a great way to
I
do
reckon we
it.
should get one on the roll for Whiskey Abbey this year.
Yeah, we can it. Yeah.
And so yeah, I was pretty stoked when that one got the silver medal this year. Have I lost everyone again?
No,
No, we hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, so that one, they got the silver at the World Whisky Awards, and then this one here actually got Australia's best pot still whiskey and won a category gold. It was called the Journey. So that was
I know you sold a couple bottles of that at Whisky Abbey last year.
yes, yeah, that one sold out pretty quickly. That was before it won the awards. It was the only single cask I'd ever done, but it came with a little pack of 4 samples, because when I test the casks quite regularly. I went in after 8 months to have a taste, and I was like, oh well, I get to do this all the time, but customers don't. So I took a litre out of that cask, and then at 16 months I took another litre, and then at 2 years I took another litre, and then it aged for another year and a half. And I did up little 10 ml samples of. So you got the new make spirit, the 8-month, the 16-month, and the 24-month, and then the whiskey itself. So you could line up 5 glasses and actually do the journey of how whiskey does change over time.
That's a great thought from the beginning of the. Let's no, it's not an experiment from the beginning of the conception of the bottling to being drawn out and saving stock all along the way.
Yeah, I just at 8 months I thought this is a remarkable change, and there's lots of whiskies that I've drunk throughout the years that I would have loved to have been able to sneak into the Bond stores in Ireland and try during certain periods to see how they're going and how they change. And so I thought, other whiskey nerds would enjoy that as well. So yeah, that's what came out with that pack.
So tell us about this bottle, the glass bottle, because it's beautiful.
Yeah, so I've got lots of I've got, not only do I love whiskey and history, but I'm also maybe due to on the spectrum, many years, anything I really get into, I collect a lot of them. So I managed to find lots of really old Irish whiskey bottles that have the green tinge. I don't know if that shows up on there. You get a bit of a green tinge. They've got that oval shape to them with the wide shoulders. And luckily, I just before when I was looking for bottles to release in, this is exactly what I wanted, but I couldn't find it anywhere, and I was about to give up. And Estel over in Italy said that they were going to start making these recycled glass bottles, which would have a green tinge and imperfections like little bubbles in them. And I looked up, and they had the shape that I wanted. It didn't come out in time for my first release, but I ended up using this ship's decanter style bottle, which Forrester used for their birthday bourbon, and Dingle used for their first release over in Ireland, and their cask number 2. So I used that as my pre-release bottle, and then I hand drew the label, and then got my computer literate friends to digitalize it. And so it really would look kind of like one of the old school looking bottles that an old Irish sailor would have pulled out of his pocket after getting off a tall ship or something.
Yeah, totally. It's a cracking bottle, and bloody stunning whiskey as well, Johnny. Congratulations, mate, for coming along in fairly recent times, and to have made a whiskey that's making a bit of noise on the global stage for Australia. But it was also in such a unique road of its own. It's a pretty hard thing to do when there's a lot of people doing a lot of things. For you to have come out with something that's very uniquely true to yourself, and I think that's what makes the whiskey so special, is the story behind it, the history, and your love for what you do as well. So
Yeah.
it's been great to hear a bit more of your story and try this one tonight. And anybody in the chat here, make sure you go give Transportation Whisky a bit of love on the socials and all that sort of thing. And hopefully you'll be over Whisky Abbey again this year, and we'll be able to share a few more
He
drams
said
there.
yes already, so
Locked in.
we
Yes.
got it. We got
I'll
it.
be there 100%.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, we want people with the personality and the drive, the passion, to tell these stories. That's what makes Whisky Abbey such a nice festival. So, yeah, thank you for joining the tasting, and also for joining Whisky Abbey last year and this year too.
Hey, Johnny, I've got a couple of questions.
Yes, Dave.
Do you think that like you'll always release them at cask strength? Like, is that the plan, and like single barrel, or like?
No, so what I do, every release, I bring it down to what I think it drinks best at.
Yep.
For instance, the tosses here, you got 160 bottles at 48.9%. And then I released, I can't remember exactly, but about 35 cask strength bottles as well. So every release I do bring it down to what I think it drinks best at. And then for a majority of the bottles, and I do a very small amount of cask strength releases for people that like to do that themselves and play around, or might just like to drink at cask strength, or bring it down to what they think it's best at for them.
This is bloody delicious, mate. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Dave. Thank you. And that first one was bloody killer, so it was hard to come back up after that one, wasn't it?
No, but it doesn't. You say your whiskey has so much flavor that it doesn't really overlap to each other. You can easily go back and forth.
There's more diversity in this lineup tonight than most Scotch whiskey tastings will do, even if we're doing 5 different distilleries. And that's probably one of the most beautiful things about the Australian whiskey industry, and what all of you guys are doing is the diversity in it, and how you can really make your own mark and make your own sort of style as well. So.
And actually, the peat on the starwort actually makes, when you taste it after the transportation, highlights the mint on the transportation.
Yeah, I think you're saying that the mint note in there as well. And
and I'm trying to dispel the myth that that the Irish distiller myth that they promoted for many years about triple distilled making it smoother. So all mine's triple distilled, but it's still got full body. You've still got lots of flavour, lots of oils. That was a big marketing thing for many years, which I believe there's so many Irish whiskies now coming out that prove that that was a myth, and it was just a marketing ploy, that triple distilling makes it smoother and lighter. You've only got to look at some of these redbreasts coming out now, and hopefully Transportation Whisky, to know that they can still be very complex, very full-bodied, very full-flavoured.
So before we leave, Johnny, what can we expect in the next few months or the rest of the year? Give us a bone.
Well, just I go over to Ireland. So we just came back from Cork Whisky Fest in March, where I did a festival bottling for them. I'm heading over again in July to Belfast Whisky Week, where we've done Australia's first blended single pot still whiskey, single pot still single malt blend, with Transportation and Kalara with Christie.
Nice.
So we've done that to go over to Belfast Whisky Week. There might be a few flying around, and add a couple of tastings at Tas Whisky Week of that bottling. I'm going to be doing another bottling in the next month or so. Later in the year, there's going to be another collaboration I've done with another distillery as well. So trying out a few things with single pot still and single malt, kind of like don't know if you've tried Irishman or Riders Tears. They are blends of single malt and single pot still. And I'm making as much as I possibly can as well at the same time.
Yeah, beautiful.
Good to hear there's so many creative things to kick on
In the pipeline, absolutely.
Yeah, it's
and
good.
we're excited for all of them. So thank you, Johnny, and cheers for joining and sharing this beautiful whiskey with us. And obviously, we'll jump back to you throughout the tasting as well if you're still hanging about and trying these beautiful whiskies with us. So great to try two very different whiskies, but they keep on getting more unique, more different, and that's the special thing about this lineup. I really think. And for the next one, we're heading to Yakandanda, to Backwards Distillery, Backwards Distilling Co., and we're going to visit Lee. So if you've got your little Backwards sample there, you haven't already poured it, feel free, get that in your glass, get it airing out, and let's try it all together. Many of you here would have tried most of the producers that we're seeing tonight. So it's a really good chance to reconnect and try the whiskey, probably releases we might not have tried, but we'll still definitely get a little bit of the distillery history in there as well. For those that might not have delved into it too much before. So Lee, mate, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and really excited for everyone to try this rye whiskey, which has recently garnered lots of accolades for you on the global stage.
Thanks so much, Jono, and thanks, Jose. Yeah, I guess just to go back to just a little bit, for those that maybe don't know too much about Backwards, but we've been going about 7 years now. Man, that time has just gone so fast. It's funny when you get into the whiskey game, what time does. Like, you kind of start filling barrels and you're wishing them to get older and older and older, and you sort of turn around and 7 years has flown by. But yeah, so we're a husband and wife team. We sort of moved up to Yakandana about 8 years ago with the idea of starting the distillery and making I guess a whiskey that, as much as possible, represented sort of where we grew up. We grew up this way, so we left the country and spent a bit of time in Melbourne and overseas, and then wanted to come back and sort of wanted to do something that sort of showcased our home. So yeah, we sort of, I guess we go to sort of, I guess, some great lengths in a way to try and do that. Like we source all our grain locally. I don't know, a lot of the producers here do that, but most of our stuff is grown not far from the Murray, which is just over the river from where we live. And we just try and work really closely with the farmers. We visit it a couple of times a year. Even just a couple of weeks ago, we got to spend a night with one of the farmers and just drink some whiskey, and it's just so fun to share those moments with the guys that actually grow the grain and sort of show them what you can turn all their hard work into. That's a lot of fun. I guess the other thing that we do in trying to be as, I guess, Aussie as hell is we sort of just only use barrels that have had that have sort of contained Australian products in them prior. So as far as possible. So, instead of getting like bourbon barrels, we've been sourcing barrels from Whippersnapper that do a corn whiskey, just because they're Australian and we can put that kind of Australian spin on all of our products. We're pretty lucky too, where, I guess, being here in Yak, we're right in the middle of a couple of different wine regions. So we're really close to Rutherglen for fortified casks. We're near Beechworth and Myrtleford for some really nice red wines, Shiraz barrels. We do go a little bit farther sometimes to get barrels. We get stuff out of the Barossa and wherever, but as long as it's Australian, we're happy to use it. So yeah, I guess that's just our little mission. We want to, I guess, when people think about Backwards, we want to be recognised as just making that effort to be extra Australian, and to be Aussie as hell is our goal. We're proud of, I suppose, the Australian scene and I guess the spirit scene, but also the wine scene and the beer scene and everything Australian craftsmanship kind of represents, and we want to sort of champion that. I guess sort of moving to the whiskey you guys are tasting. This grain actually has a pretty cool story with what I guess ties in nicely with what I'm saying there, in that it uses a rye grain that was used commercially. It was over 50 years ago. It was used commercially, and it was kind of abandoned for higher yielding crops.
What they call a heritage rye, isn't it, or something like that?
it's been called a heritage rye, but all the testing is that it's sort of a hybrid of sort of that they get sort of 3 or 4, but up to 6 different ryes that were once used commercially over 50 years ago. So yeah, so it's just got this blanket name now of the sort of heritage rye for just to represent that. But it was actually found growing wild in a paddock and by a farmer up near the Murrumbidgee, which I think is really awesome because it sort of, after kind of 50 years of neglect, this kind of grain survived and it just found a way. And it kind of went through, it kind of became extra Aussie by sort of enduring those conditions. If you actually look at when you actually look at the grain itself, it is about half the size of a commercial variety that you would buy. Now that makes it kind of really difficult to process and it's hard to mill it. Unfortunately, I sort of got into distilling and I was going to make single malt, and then I sort of I got all my gear, and then I took a little trip down to Tassie, and I met Peter Bignell, and I tried his rye, and it sort of blew me away. And I went back home and thought, oh shit, now I want to make rye. And I sort of went down that rabbit hole of rye, and then got into the American ryes and everything. So making rye, I guess, on a system that's designed for single malt is really challenging. A lot of American ryes, they'll actually ferment on the grain. They don't separate, and then they'll distill it on the grain as well. So we separate, which can lead to tears sometimes when things go wrong. Tony, who's one of our brewers, I'm pretty sure I've seen him cry a couple of times. He won't admit that. But I guess that the great thing about that kind of accident, in that we sort of fell into making rye just out of interest and the love for the product, is that sort of, I guess, separating the grain from from the wort that becomes a wash, that becomes a distiller's beer that we put into the still. And when we actually get the distillate out, it's just incredibly clean. It's just such a neat, tidy, just delicious spirit that I think I'm all, like people say, oh, why don't you just, get some new gear and just do it like the Americans do? It'd be way easier, yes, but I think now we're pretty wedded to the new make that we can create and what it does, of course, when we put it in a barrel.
I love how spicy it is.
Yeah, lots of ginger and star anise at the start, but then you
Garam masala,
you push past it, and then you start to get some it's almost like a rye bread, and then the finish is similar to Johnny's in the mouthfeel as well, very creamy and unctuous.
Yeah,
it's cracking spirit and a really good new make, obviously, as well.
Yeah, I kind of find that this the barrel that this went into was a Shiraz barrel French oak, and it's really interesting seeing what the new make does in the French oak compared to the American oak. Now, I guess that you just get some really noticeable different flavors. So we use a little bit of chocolate malt in a mash bill, and when you put it in French oak, it just really accentuates it, and you get this sort of really chocolate finish. There's sort of, it almost encourages like a bit of a tobacco leaf, I think, on the finish as well, if you can find that. Put the same distillate in an American oak barrel, and the chocolate really it's almost non-existent. You don't really find it too much, and I guess you kind of find so I guess it's a little bit more estery when on the nose in particular, but I think the creaminess kind of carries through both French and American oak. But I noticed someone mentioned in there as red gum as well. So yeah, we've done some red gum barrels too. We've got some out at the moment actually, which is rye in red gum, and sort of, again, the way the spirit behaves in a different kind of wood is really interesting as well.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. I remember you telling me a story when you were doing some red gum, that you went up to the malting company and you smoke it yourself.
Yeah. So for the red gum smoked, yes. So
What's that?
So we've done 2 different red gums. We've done red gum cast matured, and then we've done red gum smoked as well. So again, that's kind of our little thing about trying to be local, and we can't get local peat here around Yak, and you're not allowed to take it. So we've just experimented with other things that we could use. So yeah, red gum wood was what we settled on after a lot of R&D with Voyager craft malt up there in around Griffith there. So yeah, with the when it was time to do the experiment, they had a fairly small smoker and it was going to take a long time. And I literally had to cut up the red gum wood, throw it in a trailer and drive it up there. We put it through a big chipper and then we slowly smoked the malt. The problem with the red gum, I guess, compared to peat, is that it's sort of a lighter smoke. You know, you can sort of imagine it not being as oily as a peat, not as thick. So it doesn't really stick to the malt that well. So you've got to smoke the hell out of it for a good 10 days for it to actually stick. So you actually go through a lot of red gum. So there's a fair bit of elbow grease in those first couple of batches. But now the guys at Voyager are set up for it and they can smoke. That I don't have to cut it up anymore, which is awesome. They get it, sauce it, chip it, and smoke it for us. So we do a number of, we aim to sort of do a red gum smoke release every year, and we try and do a red gum barrel release every year as well. So it's sort of our little romance with red gum.
Hey Lee, can you like just double click on Voyager? Because I think it's such an awesome part of the Australian whiskey landscape that's
Yeah.
happened over the last, what, five or so years?
Yeah. So they've been around. Yeah, we've only ever bought malt off them. So they've been around just a little bit longer than us. So maybe sort of 8 or 9 years. But yeah, they're incredible guys. They work with distilleries, like to the point where you actually, they're actually really good mates now. I spend a lot of time with them. But anything you want to do, they encourage it and support you and just explore kind of crazy ideas. They all, really, I talked before about being able to meet the farmers that grow the grain and spend time with them. It's all facilitated through Voyager. They're same with them. Like they just have these incredible relationships with the farmers. They bring them in for events. They invite them along. We're at a tasting an event at Corowa a couple of weeks ago, and Stuart Voyager he brought down a couple of farmers with him just to enjoy the event, enjoy the whiskies, and again they get to sort of see that the fruit of their labor. It's so cool. It's just so cool being able to have that link to the grain and the people that grow it. And it's really the work of Voyager that do that. Oh, and also they encourage Australian distillers like myself to really explore these grains that are hard to get. They say, well, we don't have much of it, but if you decide you like it, we'll find a farmer to grow it. So it's that Voyager, huge part of the landscape and are really becoming an even bigger part of the Australian whiskey story, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And not to kind of hijack this conversation, but like I just think that this is stuff you can't find in America, right? You can't find in Scotland or Ireland, right? Like the ability to talk to a maltster and say, find me a farmer that will grow this grain so that I can then kind of turn it into something magical is really quite unique in Australia. And I think it's something that we need to celebrate more. I think as an industry have always been kind of keen on talking about the barrels, and guilty is charged, right? That's what we do at Starwood. But the grains that we have to work with, and if you think about Johnny's expressions and like that, like oats, who the fuck uses oats? Like, I mean, it's amazing, right? Like, and you guys being able to talk to Voyager and get really interesting grains is something that we can celebrate. And not to put a finer point on it, like this stuff, if it's not used by distillers, is sold as feedstock, right? Like it's $300 a ton, and we're turning it into tens of thousands of dollars a ton worth of whiskey. So I just want to remind everybody that, when we drink Australian whiskey, whether it's Starwood at $70 a bottle or whatever it is, right? Like we're supporting farmers. We're supporting farmers. And don't forget that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Dave. For a farmer to actually get a paddock of unique malt that's actually or barley that becomes maltable, I guess, like a malting grade, it's worth almost double double the price for them, and it's you know, it really does make a big difference if you drink Aussie whiskey. You are supporting those farmers.
100%. It's very cool. It's great perspective on
Yeah.
it from Dave and Lee as well.
I have two appreciations, my 2 cents. Interesting. It's like I like barbecue, right? So I have red gum and I try iron bark at the same time. It's very interesting how much more iron bark keeps the heat. Denser wood, you know, we're talking about like the way. And one day you will come to my house, any of you, and I'll show you how long when you move the embers from the burner to the barbecue side, you know, that red gum, because what we get today is the red gums are quite new. They're not really old red gums, right? So they're not dense. We interest now that you like very Australian stuff, like try some iron bark smoked. It's impressive the amount of heat that produces compared to, unless you get like, but the old red gums, I don't think you're allowed to meal those. Yeah.
The Aussie whiskey on the world stage tasting next year. We're actually going to do it at Jose's house, so we're going to try all the different woods with the barbecue as well.
I've actually got barbecue envy. I've seen you posting a few videos lately, and that barbecue looks amazing. And yeah, I've been edging my way in for an invite, so looking forward to it.
Let me know you were last weekend over here. I couldn't have so
You just have to turn up one night, Lee, just unannounced.
I'm going to.
just show up. Just show up. The same. Pick up Dave on the way down.
All right, it's a deal. I'm in for sure.
Pick up Dave and just show up.
And you can acquire some sort of animal as well.
There's always animals in the fridge. It's ready to be cooked in my house. So yeah.
Like absolutely stunning backwoods whiskey, Lee. Congratulations on, I guess this was a World Whiskey of the Year award winner. Your rye cask or your rye whiskey in the Shiraz, and I think your most recent release is a stout cask as well, which is cracking as well. So
this is the one that made the noise.
Yeah. So congratulations and thanks for sharing this one with us. Same question as we had to Johnny. I know you've got a bit of a plan on how you like to release your whiskies, but in terms of backwoods, is your plan for the next few months to do the same thing? Is there anything we can expect on the horizon?
Yeah, look, it's sort of I guess there's a bit of a rhythm now to what we're releasing. We've sort of been going along long enough now to sort of make some good plans and sort of know what our barrels or how they're behaving and what to expect. But we're actually trying to bring some core range in, which should be exciting, I suppose, that we're going to have things that are always available. And we're going to do that with probably, the whiskies that have been most successful for us. So that, is our rye Shiraz barrel. That's been awesome for us. We've won the World Whiskey Awards with that twice in the category. And we're going to do our single malt white oak, which that won the 2022 Australian Distilled Spirits Awards single malt of the year. So that's a pretty great whiskey for us. So we're going to get those two available all the time. It's that's a promise we're going to be able to make soon. So that's cool. But then we're going to keep rolling out the sort of special releases. So we'll have a red gum smoked out later this year. And we've just got the red gum barrels out at the moment. And there's some pretty cool little rising things that we've messed around with some a pair of casks. We've done some more tawny in as rise, which have been really popular when we've done those. So we've got some of those coming up too. So
and the last thing, so snow season's coming up, and many of these people might be heading up north.
Yep.
Well, not from us, right?
All the Melbourne supporters.
Yeah, and you're just there at the foothills. You're like an hour and a half from Falls Creek and Bulla. You guys go open.
So we're open. So if you come up the mountains, come and say hi. There's
coming up too. So
sorry, Jose, what was that?
School holidays is coming up. So
yeah, cool. Will I see you up here?
Maybe, not just me. Maybe a few people that's today joining.
Tourism Yakandanda over here.
Tourism. Definitely. Those in your cellar door. How many days you're open?
We're open 5 days, so we're closed on Tuesdays and Wednesdays because they're our mash days. So we've got grain and forklifts and things everywhere, so we close those days.
Awesome. So maybe I just try to go on a different day.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you guys come up, you can still come. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
We take that one.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Lee. And as Jose's saying and Lee's saying, anytime you're up in Yak or anytime you're heading up, make sure you pop into Backwoods and most of you guys or many of you people here would have met Lee before. If you've been to any whiskey tastings or whiskey events like Whiskey Abbey and that sort of thing. But for those who haven't, Lee and Lee's partner Bree are couple of the nicest people in the Aussie whiskey industry, absolutely incredible people. So definitely pay them a visit and support them as well. Get on the socials and
Hold on a sec, Jono. What are you talking about?
everybody here tonight is absolutely incredible. You're one of my favourite inner city Port Melbourne distilleries in Melbourne.
That's highly qualified. Highly qualified.
I think Davey's just saying that because he saw me behaving badly in the US last year. We had some fun over there. So
we want details.
We'll wait until the recording stops for that one, I reckon.
Yeah.
Cracking. So good. We'll jump back to you, Lee, as we go through the tasting, if you're tasting along as well, which I hope you are. But back down to Tasmania, and before we go there, I will say quickly that this month in Victoria is Drink Victorian month. So here at Castavenos, we're partnering with 100 venues, retail spots throughout Victoria, celebrating Victorian produce and our local producers here, distilleries, wineries, producers of food and all of the above. So at Castavenos in our shop, we've got a special menu focusing on Victorian produce, and there's a whiskey flight which has got some of Lee's whiskey in it. There's a gin flight. There's some highballs as well with some Starwood whiskey in there. That'll be for the whole month of June, and then we've also got a showcase tasting with Dave here in the lounge towards the end of June. And if you jump on the website and look at that one tonight and use the code, you'll be able to get yourself a decent discount off it with the code tonight. So that's Drink Victorian, celebrating the great local producers here. But every day is Drink Tasmanian Day for me, Jose. Absolutely love it. So I'm excited to jump back down to Tassie and head to Warbs Harbour. Tim, thank you so much for jumping in and also waiting for this part for us to get there. Recently opened distillery, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, but a distillery that's been making some
one of the most
amazingly huge
places of Tasmania.
Yeah, it's a beautiful spot down in Bicheno. And we're very lucky to have Tim in and to be able to try the Warbs Harbour whiskey tonight, the Port Storm. So, Tim, mate, thank you so much for joining us. I think you might still be on mute there, Tim. Might have to just pull you off mute.
There you go.
There we go. We're on air now. Cool. Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, nice and hard to follow up the nicest man in whiskey in Australia, but I'll give it a go.
How are you, mate?
Yes.
Thanks for joining. You said you haven't done many online tastings, so thank you for joining. That's
my pleasure. Yeah, no, we really haven't. We're mostly we've been going for 6 years, but only really last year we've had whiskey out, and so we've been out there and about now, and it's been a great year, I'd say, for us. Our vision, I don't know, there'll be people definitely that don't know about us on this online right now because we're fairly new, but we're fairly traditional in style. We're down on the east coast of Tasmania in a little fishing town called Bicheno, which is kind of a few hours away from anywhere. And our style is quite traditional compared to especially these last three whiskies that are our style is quite a rich, oily and classic Tasmanian whiskey, but the key difference that we love exploring is the provenance of our little spot, and that's very much trying to lean into the provenance of our maritime kind of coastline here. Like we've set up our distillery, and our vision when we started, it was with my brother Rob, who was a distiller in the Tassie industry. So he was making good, sort of beautiful traditional Tasmanian whiskey, but we wanted to do it in this style that wasn't really well done, I guess, out there. I'm sorry, when I say well done, just there's some beautiful examples of maritime distilleries, coastal distilleries around Scotland and elsewhere. Some of my favourite whiskies are from these very parts that are located right on the ocean side, and coming from a little island state that is surrounded by ocean, we just thought, what a great opportunity to try to mature barrels in that very salinity kind of based air, very stable kind of temperature basis. And that's the reason why we went and found our now home distillery, which is an old oyster hatchery and abalone farm that we've converted into a distillery. And we make, very traditional single malt whiskey. And we do it in a, we do the whole process, the mash all the way through to the distillation. In fact, we've even got our own little cooperage on site these days, and a little master of a man that coopers the barrels, which we're super lucky to have, that just so happened to move to Tassie right near us. So he works with us down here on a lot of our barrels. And the whiskey we're trying tonight is a pretty classic example of one of the core kind of ranges. We've got three real main whiskies, and this one here is called the Port Storm. And the Port Storm is follows, well, it's similar in style to some of the classic old Tasmanian whiskies that use these beautiful old fortified casks.
Yep.
This one's a tawny Port French oak cask mostly, but it's also where we've got a little carried away is that Rob, he loves marrying different casks together, and he's just got a small amount of American oak ex-bourbon in this. Like, we're only talking about 10%, but he is a big fan of balancing out flavors with different casks.
Give me 1 second. Who is this? This is your blender.
My brother, who's the distiller, who's the head distiller, his name's Rob. Yeah,
Right.
he's the one.
He's
Does
the
this
nose
work?
man.
That's right. Yeah.
And you go like, you like this? And I go like, yes.
And with some Larkanover in training as well up the belt. So,
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's prior. He was, the background was head distiller over him, and he was at Lark as well. He's also, before all that, he was a Marine. He did a master's in marine science, Antarctic science. So he's a bit of a science kind of nerd, I guess you'd call it. I call him that because my brother. I'm allowed to call him that. But yeah. So yeah, you got this classic kind of at 48%. You got these nice, classic sultana-y, raisiny sort of flavors, and we love that kind of oily, heavy, rich whiskey. Which, you usually can get in this one. And we've got a lot of people that love this very whiskey. But yeah, that American oak ex-bourbon just follows through with some of balances out some of the flavors, but it also just, brings in some of those classic pantry spices that we love about an ex-bourbon cask.
Yeah. It's a cracking whiskey, and I'm excited to dive into it in the nose of it a little bit more. But there's a little background, I guess, about the name of your distillery. Bicheno used to be called Warbs, and I think it's a really beautiful story how you guys came to use Warbs Harbour as the name of your distillery, and the sort of relation to the area as well.
Yeah. It's Bicheno, the little town here, used to be called Warbs Harbour. Like 200 years ago, it was actually named after this an Aboriginal lady called Warbada Bar. She was known as a local hero here because she swam out in a wild storm. She swam out. She was actually enslaved to she was a sealer's slave, and anyway, she swam out and saved these guys who were drowning in a storm. And so the local township, who she was literally enslaved to, kind of knew as a hero and called the town after her at the time and commemorated her by burying her when she died up on the hill here, which is only a couple of minutes away from the distillery. So it was a real key story and still lives on these days. The town was renamed when colonisation kind of occurred, but yeah, her story lives on. We're on Warb's Esplanade. There's Warb's Bay. There's the boats in the bay are called that sort of thing as well, Warb's Bay. It's yeah, we love the idea of carrying that story on. So yeah, that's how the name came about.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and paying homage to it is so important as well. So it's a really sort of spine tingling name and story behind the actual name as well, and you know, being able to visit the distillery and understand that sort of history, and then you know the grave site's still there as well, one of the only Indigenous grave sites in Tasmania to an Indigenous person. So it's a really interesting story that's got a lot of sort of cultural significance to it as well. So it's an amazing sort of name that you chose to don yourselves with, and also continue on that sort of pre-colonialization. The name of Warbs there is pretty special, and it's a whiskey that's just making a lot of noise and doing some amazing stuff. So I guess this is the one that for you guys won the World Whiskey Award there, and I can see for good reason why. It's a pretty good representation of what you guys are trying to do, but your other releases as well, where does this sort of sit with those, and what's sort of the goal that you guys are working towards in terms of your releases?
Yeah, good question, because this one's a little more cask driven. You know, having the port cask, like a big heavy cask. You know, it's got a fair bit of influence, obviously. The sort of, we've got three kind of main whiskies in our core line, and the first one is actually less cask driven. It's mostly American oak ex-bourbon, and it's just got a little marriage of a bit of tawny port in it, not much, but just gives it a little bit of this raisiny sort of finish. But that one, you know, Rob loves. He says, you know, that's the more difficult one to make in a lot of ways, because you know, there's less places to hide, you know, and that's what really about trying to be more malt forward and you know, really taste that character in the spirit. And, you know, that's one of the things that we look for in the provenance that we have here is how that kind of very, very salty kind of coastline will influence a barrel. You know, a barrel is obviously it's a living, breathing thing, and it's taking on the provenance of what it's sitting in for years, as well as exhaling angel share and you know, as atmospheric pressures are changing. And so we find this area is just sort of saturated with that salinity. And we do like to, you know, it's a subtle thing but you know, you get that little bit of seasoning or that little bit of brininess making its way through and changing flavors, you know, balancing out sweetness into savoriness, or you know, creating a little bit of that salted caramel kind of flavors. So our first whiskey, that Warb's Original, it's called, is more it's probably more prevalent in that. And then we go through to this Port Storm at 48%. The first one sort of 43, and then our last whiskey in the core range is called the Founder's Reserve, and that's actually a big, heavy, rich and oily, just 100% port cask, tawny port. That one's at 62%, and it is a really beautiful, rich whiskey. It's a real favorite. In fact, we released batch 7. We released all our whiskeys in batches, and batch 7 just got released tonight, right as we started this at 7 o'clock, and I think it's nearly out. I was just looking at the numbers there, and it's always been a bit of a favorite online, especially when we release it with our fan base. It goes pretty quick.
Wouldn't surprise
so
me.
yeah, there are
Very, very lucky to try batches along the way, the Founders Reserves. Remember trying 1 and then 3 and then 4 and 5. The odd person brings a dram here and there, and then we have it available in the store as well. So it's always amazing to try it as it goes on, and definitely encourage everyone. Make sure you get some Warm Harbour.
Yeah.
I suppose if you're not seeing dolphins out of the distillery windows, or seeing any sort of maritime life as it comes through the bay there in Bicheno, you might end up seeing one of you guys popping your head up in the surf there. You guys have a system of using the coastal water, bring it in. Is it to cool or to power the distillery?
Yes. Yeah, no, it's always an interesting people like to ask when they come through. We do tours through the distillery and tastings, that sort of thing. And that often comes up because we have an old oyster hatchery and abalone farm, and we've got, the place is just filled with tanks and plumbing and old infrastructure, and obviously they'd pump up salt water into the buildings and cycle this salt water in their tanks. When we obviously got rid of all the inside of the building infrastructure, like the tanks and stuff like that. Well, mostly, I've still got one tank that I use for crayfish, but we have the old intake lines that go hundreds of meters out to sea and pumps and licenses to suck up salt water. And so we converted that system by running it through a heat exchange and taking the cold energy out of the ocean, converting that energy through this heat exchange system into a fresh water. So it goes on a fresh closed loop circuit within the distillery. So fresh water is actually running through our equipment to avoid corrosion. But effectively, we're taking the cold energy out of the ocean for the cost of running a pump and cooling all of our, which is obviously cooling the condensers in the stills, and we use it to control the ferment in our jacketed fermenters. So it's a bit of a genius, but also super simple idea that's kind of a green energy saving. So it's great for our pockets because it saves us power, but also good for the environment because, it's using less energy.
Yeah, totally. Beautiful, beautiful spot in the world, Bicheno, and go down and visit Tim. And if you go down there and you want to have a round of golf, you just got to bring a tenner in your pocket and you just give it to the greenskeeper on your way through. Very old school style of life down there at Bicheno. It's a beautiful spot in the world. So definitely go down, visit Warps Harbour and Tim and the team.
So you have a cellar door, and now he said crayfish. We should go there.
Oh, we'll be on the way.
So one thing before we leave. So what happens at your distillery? Do you lose alcohol? Do you lose water in your barrels?
Actually, it's mostly it goes down, which is an interesting fact. Our bond stalls are mostly, we love to talk about how it's more of a classic style in the stable kind of temperatures, and they're fairly insulated type bond stalls just naturally because the buildings are brick and they're close to the ocean, so you get not as much fluctuation in temperatures that you do in other parts of Australia. Obviously, when you're on the coastline, you just don't get the frosty kind of mornings and the hot days, and so you get a more consistent and slower maturation. So yeah, it's always something that Rob, it was sort of important to him. He came from learning under Casey Overeem, I suppose, back in the day, and they were very much about that sort of more stable and slower maturation techniques where possible. And it's not always possible, obviously, and that's something that often in Australia is celebrated, the fluctuations, and it can be a great thing, of course. But yeah, we find here it's a bit more stable.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Hey mate, what's the next limited release now that I get no sneak peeks?
Is that George there popping up asking the hard
Mate,
question?
I'm wearing my favorite t-shirt at the moment.
The big Warps Harbour fans.
Nice. Well, without giving too much away, yeah, we do our kind of core range of whiskies, and we release them in batches. So when they're available, of course. And then a few times a year we pull something out that's special, and we've got some really beautiful old kind of fortified casks, some rarer stuff that we've been working on, some collaborations, and we did a really cool not uncommon. I know Star would have done a really awesome stout cask, and most distilleries here actually, if I look around, and you were a bit of a sucker for those as well. We did one, a about not a year ago even, which and we're sort of working on the tail end of that collaboration. We've got more stout from the actually it's from these guys. I was just cleansing my palate with a Bicheno beer, a very small little brewery that nobody would have heard of because you can't really get it outside of Bicheno basically, but it's they make a beautiful imperial stout, and in fact he just decanted it out of the casks and brought some in today. So it's at a 10%. It's actually, so they've done this once before, which is when we did the first collaboration, and they've just decanted this second stout, and it's a little different to how the first one was, creamy and beautiful, and got those classic bitter chocolatey kind of notes. So that's something in the works, George. But no promises as to when and if and how and all the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, nice. Just want those sneak peeks again, eh?
Come on, Tim. Don't be a tired ass. When's your peated come out? Come on.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that one. I was waiting for him to leak that information. And yeah, so are we expecting it this year?
I don't think so, George. We've got some peated in barrel, and it's been a really interesting process because that's something that we've done ourselves, and don't like the idea of using grain that's peated as much. We very much want to use our own sources. So we only use Tasmanian malted barley, and of course we've got the challenge of trying to infuse the smoke into that with peating, and we do it post malt, like many, but we're using a peat that's quite different actually to the Highland peat, which is made of the classic sphagnum moss, and that that classic Highland stuff is quite different to what we get down on the coast. We've got a peat spot, which is actually the back of a marsh, like a salt marsh land, and it's about 10 k's down the road from the distillery. It's a big area actually. It's a sheep farm that has about 10,000 acres of land, and within his land is this salt marsh, and it turns from fresh river into a lagoon on the coast. And if you go up and down the river, you go from fresh, obviously, to salt. And it's really interesting. We've taken a lot of different samples up and down that river and done small scale, smoking and peat, to infuse that, and small scale distillations to test it. Did a lot of that to get to a point before we actually did full production, and we're excited about it. We're not like trying to emulate a classic Isla distillery that's very coastal, which we're trying to remain true to our style and Tasmanian sort of style. So we're not all about being heavy peat, but there's some delicious kind of light peated samples or works in progress happening. So I don't think I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag because I can't, because I don't think it's going to come out this year. But yeah, it's still in cask, and something to look forward to down the track.
I'm looking forward to it, as I'm sure everybody is, and it's going to be one of the most quintessentially Australian peated whiskies, in that respect, and the methodology you're working through to actually get to the point where you have your release is amazing, and there's no need to compare it against any Scotch whiskey, any peated Scotch whiskey, because it's going to be uniquely to you guys. It's going to be Warbs Harbour Tasmanian peated whiskey, and that in itself is going to be incredible and make some amazing noise right across the world. So Tim, can't wait to try that, but get to try this, and everything else you guys are releasing is absolutely stunning in itself. This is what it's all about. So it's been amazing to try the Port Storm tonight and chat to you a little bit about Warbs Harbour. Anytime you guys go down to Bicheno, make sure Warbs Harbour's the spot you're there to visit. It's a cracking whiskey. I suppose we've got one more whiskey before we'll obviously go back and chat to everyone, but this whiskey is probably one that a lot of people have been waiting to try, and for very good reason. Whiskey with a lot of age on it in the Australian whiskey industry is not something that we see too regularly. No. And a whiskey distillery that has a pretty rich story, one of the oldest in the Australian whiskey industry, and very good friend of Castavino's, Dave de Batista, joining us from Helios Road. So Dave, mate, thank you so much for joining us, and allowing us to try
Our
this,
good friend,
this great
my
16-year-old
good
whiskey
friend
design.
Dave, the second Dave.
Thank you, boys. Yes, no, I love Casa. I've spent many a night and many an evening and supposed work
Oh yeah.
there in many a years. We even dodged police going there and back over 3 lockdowns, so it was well worth it. All we needed to do was get Jose just drunk enough to open a really old whiskey, and it made it worthwhile. So we did that plenty of times over lockdown, that's for sure. So I think the 1976 Ben Riach, that was a good one. But Jono and I were a bit nervous, so we filmed you agreeing that you would open that bottle just to prove we didn't lie. So it was well worth it in hindsight.
I do remember that night. Yeah.
That and the night where you fought Jim McEwen over Zoom, that was a winner too. You know, that's on YouTube immortality right there.
You remember well.
Yeah, it's a highlight that one. And we got to try his private cast, which was obviously a good thing, but it was very entertaining as I sat behind the camera, freaking out, looking at Jono going, I think we just got banned from every Brook Laddie event known to man.
Yes. And my improvised English or my half good English trying to explain myself. That was hilarious.
That was awesome. But yes, no, now I work at Hellier's Road now. So sort of as the guys touched on before, I used to work in Melbourne and ran bars there, opened a whiskey bar and ran a whole group of things from nightclubs through to restaurants. And one of the mainstays was that I always bought whiskey off Jose, stuff that I couldn't get through the usual channels and things that piqued my interest. And probably one of the first ways I really got exposed to Tassie whiskey and the like was through conversations with Jose. And then I hooked up with a missus from Tasmania, and she took me down to Tassie for the first time and took me to distilleries. And the first distillery she took me to when we came down to Tassie was Hellier's Road, because her family from a little town not far from there called Penguin. And we went there and had lunch and had a tour. And then lo and behold, many years later, I ended up working for them to bring us to where we are now. Yeah, sort of a lot of people wondered why I went to work for Hellier's. And even when I was in Melbourne and working in Tassie afterwards, I sort of didn't think I would work for Hellier's. But I met the guys and they were telling me about these great plans that were coming up and rebrand and re-excitement back into the brand with new people coming on board. And I saw a bit was what was coming, and I didn't really realize at the time, but the breadth of stock that they have at their disposal was sort of unheard of, and no one really knew about it because they didn't talk about it. Hellier's are really mild-mannered people, the people that built the brand and started it. It was started by a group of dairy farmers back in the 1950s. They got together and started a dairy company called Better Milk. And for pretty much 40 years, they operated, made a lot of money. And then come to the 1990s, they were like, what are we going to do with all this money that we've made? You know, they're not from Melbourne. They're not going to buy a Ferrari. They're not going to be in Sydney getting around in a G-Wagon. You know, they're mild-mannered people getting around in a ute that's probably lasted for 30 years. So they did a bit of a case study and found, oh, maybe we could open up a whiskey distillery. And literally right next door to their dairy farm, in the backlots of Burnie, they built a whiskey distillery on site where it still is now. So it's pretty much the longest serving distillery on one site, that's Scottish style, in Australia. And since the late 90s to early 2000s, they literally just worked away, distilling, making new make, and doing it the Scottish way, putting it into casks, 200-300 litre in size. No dinky little sort of Tasmanian small casks, 20-50 litre casks, all full size 200-300 litre casks. And then, they just racked them up, stuck them in the bond stores and left them be. And ticked along, and obviously you're your business, you need to make some cash flow. So they started releasing some whiskies, but those early whiskies, they were quite underdone. They were young whiskies coming out of big casks, not much wood exposure over time. And they got a bit of a bad rap, but over the years, slowly they were starting to bring whiskies to market that came with age. We're pretty much the first people to release a 12-year-old whiskey in Australia. Yeah, and then slowly but surely, up until the last couple of years, suddenly they started bringing out regularly 18-year-old, 19-year-old whiskies. And that's sort of where I started to notice that, holy shit, these guys have got some liquid with age. Which brings us to the whiskey in the glass here. So this is a 16-year-old single cask. It was put in a cask on the 10th of the 7th, 2003. It was a full life maturation on one ex-American oak cask. It was a 20-litre cask. We believe it was an ex-Jack Daniels cask, but we can't 100% prove that because I don't have the records of the wood type from where it came from 100%. But this cask came about, it was quite bizarre, really. Earlier this year, they were putting together some single cask bottlings, and they work with good friends of yours, Jose, La Maison de Whisky, over in Europe a lot. La Maison have been exporting Helliers over to Europe for well over 15 years now. And every year, La Maison do a selection of single casks. They choose the ones that they like from samples that we send to them or when they come out to try at the distillery, and they select some that then get bottled up for them. This cask, this specific release, was actually a cask that had been bottled up ready for them. But when we were submitting whiskies for the World Whisky Awards, someone at the distillery thought, this is a good one, let's chuck that in the box that we're sending over to Europe. And they did. No one really thought about it because we actually put in some 19-year-olds, some 21-year-olds, some 20-year-olds for assessment as well. No one thought about this little 16-year-old cask too much. And then the results came back, and when you did the sort of the semis, as we call it, the category wins, this one was shortlisted as well. And we're like, oh, no shit. What did we actually send? Let's actually go get one and actually try it. Shit. And we pulled it up, and everyone thought, yeah, this is fucking delicious. It's actually pretty good. So you know what? Let's not send it to La Maison. Fuck them. We'll keep it. So we did. And then lucky we did, because then when the final results came out, this was awarded best single cask in Australia. Not a category winner or anything, but the one cask from all the categories that was chosen as the best. It was, cask 3191.04, bottled at 60.7%, and we got 170 bottles out of it. It's 60.7%, but I just drink this one straight. It's so fruity, it's so rich, it's over the top, it's ridiculous. It shouldn't drink as easy as what it does, but to me, it's a banger.
It's absolutely stunning. It's pretty special, I guess. We're trying, in terms of those awards, the World Whisky Awards, Australia Best Single Cask of 2024. Yep. So it's amazing that we're able to try it, and thank you for sharing it with us, Dave. I know there wasn't many bottles left, but when we sort of started chatting about this tasting, Dave was courteous enough to pop one aside and include it in this tasting. It's a really special thing for us to try, and it's a bit of a monumental cask in terms of Australian whiskey, and definitely Helliers Our Road. Lots of ginger, a little bit of spice, lots of salted caramel on there as well. To whiskey that's got great refinement as well.
I think the crystallized ginger is probably one of the most highlighted notes in this one. And
it just drinks so well. To me, I'm just like, people are like, oh yeah, add some water because it is strong. It's 60.7, but I love it just like this. I think it's just a banger straight up.
Yeah, I get to what you just said. It's amazing that after 16 years, you still have 60% alcohol.
Yeah.
And, this wouldn't be a very old cask neither. Like when we're talking about like in Scotland, when you get these 60% Scottish whiskies, they're normally very old refills. So
this wouldn't have been a refill from what we have on record. This was, came to us straight off the container from America. We do have a lot of great relationships with cask buyers. So we quite often, like I'll just be at the distillery, it was probably about 4 weeks ago, there was a container pulling up and we're just unloading like 100 casks that had come directly from a broker over in America. So this would have been the same situation over 16 years ago, just literally came in, got filled up. It's probably tightened up a bit, filled up, and then just rolled into the bond store. So straight out.
So tell us a little bit about Helliers Road and this rebranding now, because it's an amazing change. which we actually love. As a retailer by heart, right? I actually absolutely love the new packaging.
Yeah, it's come together really well. Well, technically it was an over 18-month period, but the guys at the brand, they realized, the packaging that it was in was tired. It was done. It had been in there way too long. I mean, if you look at most Scotch brands, they do a refresh about every 10 years or so to their packaging, and Hellier's had been in that previous packaging for over 20 years. So it was time for an update. It was indicative of its time. I mean, Hellier's even till now, we have a whole bottling plant at the distillery. And when that was built over 20 years ago, the only bottling wine machine you could buy was for wine bottles. So that old bottle, it was an old wine bottle. That was the shape that it was used. It was basic, it was simple, it was chosen for function over form. So when it was come time to update, they realized, the bottles, they're too tall. The labeling was a bit shit. It was a bit dated. It needed, and in a retail perspective like yourselves, people shop with their eyes. You walk in, you look up on the shelf. It looks pretty, you're going to engage with it. If it doesn't, you pass it by and you move on. So they knew that they needed to update their packaging to a modern, I suppose, aesthetic, but still trying to keep that heritage and style. So they went through an 18-month process of selecting the glass, working up the packaging and the design. And that's one of the things that sung out to me when I was interested in changing over to work for them, was like, the packaging now represents the quality of liquid that they've now got to bring to market. So it's done wonders for the brand, and also the new whiskey team that we have there, the way in which they use the liquid on site, the way in which they blend, the way in which they select. It's all new, it's modern, it's to the modern palate, and it's what's doing wonders for us. 2024 has been a massive year already for Hellier's. We've already won top honors in the International Spirits Competition and World Whiskey Awards, in the San Fran Spirit Awards. We've clean swept them all with gold medal winners. So it's fantastic to really see the liquid now presented well and doing so well on the international stage.
Yeah, and it's not surprising. Like, this is now just at such an amazing stage. You guys are just going to keep on having beautiful releases around this sort of age statement, because you laid the foundations a lot longer than and before anyone else was thinking about putting foundations even in their periphery. So I think we're going to keep on getting Hella Zero whiskey like this, and this is just the start. For those going down to visit Tassie, you've got a pretty special sort of distillery door and restaurant down there. We can pop by.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a bit out of the way. I mean, I live in Launceston, but it's an hour and a half from where I am along the northwest coast, behind Burnie, in a little area called Havenview in the hinterland there. But we have a beautiful site. I mean, it was built back in the late 90s with the future in mind. The distillery, people still amazed. You walk in there, you see the size of the stills, the size of the operation. It's bloody huge. The still's biggest in the Southern Hemisphere for a long time. It was planned with the future in mind. The bond stores and just the view, looking over the valley and the hinterland. I was there the other day in the morning, watching some eagles circle above, looking down into what was happening. It was amazing. It was a beautiful sight to see. And it's also beautiful when you get to walk through a bond store and look up at a wall of 200 and 300 litre casks, all of them in that whole section, over 20 years of age, maturing away, 5 deep and 12 high. We're pretty lucky with the breadth of stock that we have on hand now, because of those generations that have come beforehand. And everybody comes down because we've got a restaurant there. So you can go, you can do a tour, and then when you're a bit tired from your long drive and a lot of whiskey drinking, sit down and have a great lunch.
Count me in. I reckon if we go visit Tim, then we go down to Dave, we'll go have a few drinks with Johnny. We've got a trip organised there.
So and an hour and a half for us in Victoria. It's not that much. It's just maybe from here to Thornbury. That's how long it takes to.
I'll drive you. Don't worry.
I take that one and I keep it in my pocket. Thank you there.
Bus license.
Yes. You guys have been releasing quite it's pretty interesting. It's like all these age statements right now. It's like it's crazy, unbelievable. Like how many new whiskeys you have been releasing with the age statement. What's the thought behind like their releases, right? So it's like it's amazing the pool of casks you you guys have to choose right now and the option to release?
So I suppose one of the reasons I went to work for Helliers when I was looking at them was the breadth of stock on hand means that as a rep, as a person that represents a brand, I can go into a pub and talk to them about selling them a 700 ml 7-year-old Tasmanian single malt whiskey, and I can sell it into them wholesale at $85. Or I can go into a whiskey specialist store and sell them a 21-year-old single cask, you know, that's been maturing all on one site that whole time in that one cask. So there's such a wide breadth of stock that we can pretty much bottle anything now to appeal to a hospitality or retail outlet, whether or not it be a single store, a pub, or an international chain or a private bottler overseas. You know, we're pretty lucky, and we've done a great job at exporting. You know, we're Tasmanian exporter of the year 4 times in the last decade. You know, La Maison de Whisky, the partnership that we have with them is huge. We send on average around 4 to 5 shipments to them a year with a shipping container that holds about 6,000 bottles at a time. So we do have the ability to be able to specialize, whether or not it's a single cask or whether or not it's a special release, but for a market in a whole nother part of the world. And to me, and to a whiskey brand, I find that quite exciting because we can specialize. We can offer the Tasmanian product all over the world, which we sort of always have done, but Helliers never really advertised that to the world. They just did it. They're very modest people. But now it's not so much about modesty, it's about explaining to people this is what we're doing, and now we want even our local market to be aware of this as well. Maybe they didn't do a very good job of advertising that in the past to what we do now.
This is maybe a curveball there question, but you guys did what many distillers didn't before, which is build the international market before you build the local market, right? So you're going now quite prominent on the local market.
Yeah, I think
how do you see like the international market that you already have receiving your whiskey compared to now? How what's the experience selling the same whiskey, right, in the local market compared to what you've been doing for years now?
Yeah, it's funny. You see some brands in Australia that release older whiskies, they release it to quite a high price point. You know, but Helliers, because they've always been selling overseas, they've needed to keep their price point in mind, knowing that, especially in this current market, if you want to buy something, even if it's made here, you buy it from England, it's cheaper. You can still get it sent here cheaper, and you can get a better outcome for the consumer. So Helliers have always priced their whiskies on an international mindset that we want to be able to sell it over in Europe and people could buy it here locally at a similar price point. So if we were to go, oh, here's a 21-year-old whiskey, it's $2,500, people go, well, that's insane because you'll never be able to sell that at that price point in Europe, where you can get a 21-year-old whiskey for 1/10 that price. So we have always maintained what we think is a quite fair price point for our whiskies, both so they're received well overseas and now received well locally as well. So that model has always been maybe perceived in Australia as it's cheap, it must not be very good. So now we are trying to change that perception in Australia by saying, well, actually, it's very good whiskey, but at what we perceive as being a fair price. So our market, right now is all about going out to people and putting liquid on lips. So I can sit there and right here, like this bottle right here, is our 19-year-old Helliers Road Voyager cask, as we call it. This here is considered quite expensive overseas where we sell it, but also it's considered quite cheap in comparison in the Australian market to whiskies made here of similar age. So for us, it's education that the liquid inside is good when a lot of people thought maybe it wasn't, but at the same time, keeping it to that international standard.
Yeah.
I've got a question, Jose, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So we just had like Tim on talking about traditional Tasmanian whiskey, and you guys have just been talking about Tasmanian whiskey putting Tasmanian whiskey on the map around the world, but you couldn't find two more distinctly delicious but different whiskies. So what is Tasmanian whiskey?
I don't think Hellier's ever really wanted to champion that they were Tasmanian whiskey, and that was the standard that they put forward. The Hellier's people said, let's build our distillery from the inspiration that we drew it from, which was from Scotland. So I know a lot of people see Tasmanian whiskey as, sort of, this artisan person with a little still on their kitchen bench, working away with these richly fortified casks and producing this big flavor. Whereas the guys at Hellier's were like, well, this is what we've been taught, that this is the Scottish style, so let's follow this model. So we've only filled into these big casks into our style of still designed for wholesale business.
So it's Tasmanian whiskey in the finest of Scottish traditions?
Pretty similar to what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tim, what about you? What's Tasmanian whiskey for you?
It's a great question, and well pulled up there. I mean, a lot of people I think in Tasmania would say that it's more like exactly what David was just saying there. It's the richer and oilier and heavier in style and driven from fortified casks. And so, yeah, Hellier's is a little, unique in that style because it's not as traditional in that way, using a lot of the classic bigger bourbon casks, that sort of thing. But yeah, as time goes on, that's a real challenge for the Tasmanian industry because, as time goes on, there's more diversity and there's different distilleries using different casks and different styles. So, it's a real question for the Association of the Tasmanian Whiskey Industry and trying to nail that down. I think if you spoke to a majority of the industry, if they'd still lean back to that heavier style or richer and oily and fortified driven. Not necessarily fortified, but at least the oils and the viscosity and that sort of stuff. Yeah, that'd be probably my answer.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's an excellent question, Dave, for sure. And does it need to have an identity in terms of a spirit? Well, probably maybe as it takes a bit of a grasp on the global stage. What is Tassie whiskey? It's a really good question. But the thing that I always find quintessential behind any whiskey is the people behind it. And if you look at the people behind Tasmanian whiskey, you've got a really unique sort of person down in Tassie. You've got a really great community, and you've got guys with a lot of interests and a lot of perspectives, a lot of people that have got some really beautiful ways to look at things. And I think maybe rather than saying this is a Tasmanian style of whiskey, more saying that this is the Tassie way of producing whiskey could be a really beneficial way to look at it. Because Tasmanian, as a whole, Tasmania has this great approach to life, a great approach to way of doing things. And I think that can definitely influence the whiskey scene as well. We're going to have different styles, but it's the Tassie way that goes behind it and the way that these people put that into the whiskey that I think is probably more quintessentially Tasmanian than any sort of common similarity in the actual spirit that's produced.
Yeah, and I only raise it because, and I'm going to be a little controversial. I guess Tasmanian distillers kind of see themselves as different to the rest of Australian whiskey distillers. And so to me, I don't know why, because as Julian just pointed out, the thing that kind of unites us is the fact that we're so different and that we've got the liberty to be so different, right? And that's the bit that should be celebrated. And so on one hand, I think Tim, and tell me if I'm wrong here, here's the thing, right? Whiskey talks to the place it's made, right? All great whiskeys do that, whether it's Irish, and, Johnny kind of brought that to life with the way that historically it was made in Ireland, and his interpretation locally with, I think, better cereals that you'll never find in Ireland, right? Like we just got better quality cereals here. Tim, you kind of talked about it in terms of the malted barley and that oily, rich characteristic. And, I think, the place that it's made is such an important part of what we're doing, right? But it's the best whiskeys in the world talk as much to the ingredients as they do the culture of the place. right? And the thing that we kind of own in Australia more than anything else is this idea that, like, whilst we respect tradition, we take ideas for our own walk and interpret them in our own way. And that's, based on like our ancestry and the multicultural diversity that exists and the history of the place, but we kind of got our own interpretation of it. And I think that that's what unites us all as a category. But, Tasmania often seems to go on its own and sort of celebrate Tasmania as opposed to celebrating Australia. And so to me, it's like, well, what does it mean to be in a Tasmanian distillery? And, I hear you, Dave, but I don't see the word Australian whiskey on the label. I see Tasmanian whiskey on the label of Hellier's Road, right? And so, like, to me, it's like, well, what is Tasmanian whiskey? And I think that it's the place where whiskey kind of started in Australia. We can sort of, in the modern era, it started in Australia, and it's where I learned how to make whiskey. But I'm still, like, we talk a lot about it, but I don't still understand what it means.
I don't think there's one answer for that. I think, as Tim was saying, the whiskey's been big and oily, which that all comes back to the grain, the weather, the climate down here. I mean, we've always, since I was younger, we suffered through a worse climate than the mainland. So now it's working to our advantage, I suppose, in some aspects. But so climate would be a thing, but there's even microclimates within this state itself to give different results. The people as well. You can say all these things. I think ultimately you just got to, because we're an island state, we are separated from the mainland. Apart from the continental shelf, we probably would probably be the west coast of New Zealand or something, wouldn't we? So I don't think there's just one answer that says why we are Tasmanian and are separate. Just like, I suppose, over in Europe, you've got Scotland and England on the same island, but they're separated, and then you've got Islay, and they call themselves Islay whiskey. Ireland itself as well.
Yeah, I know. But if you think of Isla as a really good example there, Jono, like, it's like, when you pull the cork on an Isla whiskey, what you're getting, right? And if you pull the cork, if we were just pulling corks blind, said, where's this whiskey from? We'd go, that's from Isla. Right?
When I go over to Ireland, I do get I've done many tastings over there, and they do say there is this underlying note, this similarity that we do have, and they couldn't. The discussion that Laurie O'Dwyer did with on Whiskey Chats, they couldn't knock it on the head and say this is why. I mean, we do. It could be the environment, the weather that our barley grows in down here, and we are using Tasmanian barley, so it could be the barley.
It's very. Let me again put my 5 cents, right. This is something that I learned from Yumi from Chichibu Distillery, right? Because they get asked all the time about Japanese whiskey. What's the difference between Japanese? The biggest question Japanese people get asked is, what's the difference between Japanese whiskey and Scottish whiskey? Because they learn to make whiskey with the Scottish, right? And she always asks with another question. She always replies with another question, saying like, what is Scottish whiskey? It's barley from France, Germany, also Scotland and England, and Germany, malted in England or Scotland, but then distilled in Scotland. But that same barley is also shipped to Ireland and distilled there. Then that's why we grew up and we learn about the Scottish styles. The Islay is peated, but today you got Bruichladdich that is almost totally unpeated, right? Bunnahabhain unpeated, and then you go to the Highlands and you got, Benriach, making peated whiskey, Glendronach making peated whiskey, you know, Benroma making peated whiskey, and also they all make unpeated whiskey.
But
So
it's Scotch at the end of the day, right? And Scotch has an identity.
correct, but it's what is
We're trying to go to the world as as a category, right? We're trying to go to the world as a category. And when we have people celebrating Tasmania, but then say, I can't tell you why it's important, but it is. And then you've got Australian distilleries saying we're Australian. If we can't explain why, then what's the point of calling it out? That's my provocation.
is this to that answer, is a style more than the
Style. Well, tell me what the style is.
but the philosophy behind.
What's the philosophy?
And in a Venn diagram, Tasmanian whiskey would be a smaller circle within the Australian category. You know, and the Tasmanians
Okay, well, what's the circle? This is what I'm asking. What is the circle?
I guess it's the same as like Victorian whiskey saying we're Victorian whiskey. New South
We don't
Wales
say we're
whiskey saying
Victorian whiskey.
oh,
That's the point.
lots of people do, not you in particular, maybe, but and same with New South Wales distilleries and WA distilleries. They say where they're from. I don't know whether they're specifically trying to say we're different,
And
and
if
we're not. We want to be a.
we call out Melbourne, it's only because we're calling out Melbourne years, right? And everybody knows that Melbourne's famous for 4 seasons in a day, right? Like everyone knows that. And so there's a climate thing that we can kind of attach that to and sort of like say, okay, I get it. So 4 Melbourne years is very different to wherever it is anywhere else in the world for that matter, right? Let alone Australia. All I'm saying is everybody kind of wants to celebrate Tasmanian whiskey. And all I'm asking is, what is it that you share in common?
in my opinion,
Apart from the scar.
Genetics.
No, in my opinion, the Tasmanian whiskey is more a philosophy than a style. You know, and Tasmania has not just that on whiskey, has that on every kind of food and produce they do, which they try to source everything really local. And as a consumer myself, like I would say, like most of Tasmanian products that are sold as Tasmanian, you know, whatever processed product, right? Which is comes within Tasmania and is made by Tasmanians, and it's you know all the packaging is made there.
Totally.
All the process is being made
100%. And I totally get Dave's point as well, because it's a great point. You know, what is quintessentially Tasmanian when the big thing is from Tasmanian whiskey? This is Tasmanian whiskey. But I'd echo that it's not stylistic, it's a philosophy, and that's probably a hard pill to swallow for maybe people on the mainland. But also I think in Victoria we celebrate Victorian whiskey. In South Australia they celebrate South Australian whiskey. Wherever you are, people are celebrating their regionality, and it's not anywhere in Australia, you know, this is the style because we're in this region. I think it's probably more so philosophy. In Australia we love supporting our neighbours, and that, you know, leads us to celebrate the people around us and champion our own stuff. And that might not be as quantifiable as a style. And in fact, I definitely don't think it is. I think it's a philosophy and a way of doing things. And in many ways that might be a bit of a backward steps on the world stage. But I also think that locally that's got the potential to be really positive. And I see sort of both sides of it there as well. But
I'm not on a particular side. I agree with what Dave's saying, and I lived in Melbourne for half my life, so I do understand there is that identity thing, but it may change and it may move forward the same way that the Victorian Football League turned into the Australian Football League.
Yeah, totally. Don't get me wrong. Like I have like the strongest affinity to like all of those, you know, between Sullivan's Cove, Overeem, Lark, Hellier's Road. I mean, that's where I started in this industry nearly 20 years ago in Tasmania, right? So I'm not at all, I hope that no one's taking this as me kind of at all kind of disparaging Tasmanian whiskey. I guess the provocation is, if we're trying to take whiskey to the world and celebrate it and kind of bring bring something to light, we can get to Isla and Highlands and Lowlands and all those sorts of things. But first, we've got to celebrate, if we're using the Scottish example, Scotch whiskey, single malt Scotch or Scotch whiskey, right? Japanese whiskey didn't turn up around the world as Yamazaki, Nikka, Chichibu, you know what I mean? Like they turned up as Japanese whiskey. And as soon as we start diluting that conversation with, oh, well, we're from Tasmania, we're from Victoria, game's lost, right? Because my attitude would be, and Lee, I'd love to hear from you as, not from Victoria, but just not from Tasmania. Like, I don't know that anybody doesn't think of their product from an artisanal perspective, doesn't think of it as something that they want to go the extra mile for flavor for, doesn't want to, in Dave's instance, respect tradition, but also push the boundaries, that doesn't want to celebrate the local ingredients within their that they're available to, and that, doesn't think they're making, that isn't making world-beating whiskey. We're all making world-beating whiskey. So to me, like, I just think that it becomes like this, we're talking to ourselves when we start to say we're from Tasmania, we're from this, when it doesn't mean anything in a way that actually celebrating that we're from Australia does. Because we
Dave,
share the same attitude. We share the same attitude.
I sort of see exactly where you're coming from, Dave, because I was lucky enough to be in the US with you, and sort of, when we were in Chicago, and we sort of, we went to lots of different bars and we saw Starward on shelves there. And, that was amazing for a group of Australian distillers to go into an American city and see Starward in a lot of different bars. So I really do understand where you're coming from. And the message that I really got from you on that trip was that you can't grow a category on your own. And, you made incredible sacrifices to move your family to the US to try and do this. And yeah, like when I saw your bottle standing there all on its own on shelves around the US, it's like he's right. We need to band together, and like you say, you can't grow a category on your own. And I think the best way to do that is we need to identify ourselves as Aussie made, or just like Scotch whiskey. And then, this, I guess, the smaller identifier, the subcategory of that is Isla or Highland or Speyside. But the first thing you see is that it's Scotch. So the first thing that we should see is that it's Aussie whiskey.
Well, look, maybe just to sort of touch on, I got a bit of history from the Helliers guys about how their conversation got into actually getting into export, and because they got started making whiskey on a more sort of industrial scale, not sort of that boutique tabletop style, they had the guys from the Maison approach them just saying, we want to buy an Australian whiskey, and we've been shopping around, and this was good 15 years ago, and they go, we can't find anyone that will produce liquid to have enough to export. Do you guys have something that you could do? And we had liquid. So they produced a bottle, they sold it to that market, and it was made in Tasmania. So they put that on the label, it's made in Tasmania. And that's sort of how it got to market. They didn't actually go out there saying, hey, we're Tasmanian, we're better than anyone else, get it here. They were just a customer from the European market, came looking for a product from down here that people are asking for. And, to this day, right now, it says on the label, on the Helliers label right here, it says product of Australia. So I don't think the guys from Helliers anyway, and I can't speak for the greater industry as a whole, have been going out there sort of saying, hey, we're Tasmanian, we're better than the rest. They've just been saying, this is a product that we've made, and this is where it's made, and this is what we're putting into market. And that's been the conversation that they've continued along. Maybe other parties have emphasized this a bit more to try and get themselves an edge to market. I don't know.
Dave,
but it's up to them.
Let me tell you right now, right? I think if you measured the font size, I don't have the label in front of me, I haven't Googled it, but I would hazard a guess that the word Tasmanian whiskey is a lot bigger than the words product of Australia.
Well, yeah, it is marginally, by looking at it.
I just wanted to check. Yeah.
And also,
this has been the conversation that the brand has put to market, that is from Tasmania since when they got started. So it's something that they're carrying along because it's part of their brand communication.
But what does it mean? That's all I'm asking.
I really enjoy
It
this.
means that
It's
their
not
is where
often
their
that
product was made.
There's a
You
couple
know,
not
of
that's what
often
they
people,
want to put it forward.
it's not often people on the mainland want Tasmania to be a part of it so much. This is great.
I think there's a couple of conversations going on here, and they're all really great. And I don't even know if we expected to go here, but this is what is an amazing thing about a tasting like this, where we've got everyone involved from different parts of the Australian whiskey industry. So we're going to get these beautiful, robust conversations, and I'd love to continue these conversations on and see how we can grow and philosophize about these sorts of things and chat about these sorts of things as an industry and as consumers to understand both what whiskey means to us locally in terms of where we're from, but also how we do push that whiskey on a global scale. And Dave, you know, from Starwood, you're the guy who's really started to look at this on a world scale. So your perception of it is one of the most significant value in terms of how do we get Australian whiskey to a world stage. And then, you know, the vast majority of distillers, particularly from, you know, Tasmania, but also around Australia, it's not so much how can we get it onto a global stage, it's how can we just sell enough bottles to keep the operation going. And if that means sort of really diving into that locality, because that's what a lot of people around them are you know, looking for, then that's got merit as well. So there's a couple of different sides to it as well, I think, and it's a great conversation to be having, and it's beautiful to be able to have it, and I'm excited to keep that going in some way, shape or form as we all keep going. I could honestly chat about this all night. I feel like we should go back through the whiskies and
all start dating
and say thanks to everyone who's joined, and also jump out to the audience and see if there's anyone who's got thoughts on the conversations or the whiskies that we've tried. It's probably not one of the ones where we'll go back necessarily and try the whiskies exactly as we do.
A lot of discussion tonight. Yeah,
but
which is good.
I might just go back through each of the producers before we open up to everyone, and say thanks for joining and see if we've got any further things we'd like to add. And obviously, Dave, we started with you tonight. Thanks so much for sharing the twofold and this special single cask, and for all your chats tonight as well.
It's great. Look, and I think that what everybody should take out of tonight is that, like, we've probably got the most innovative and exciting whiskey space in the world. You know, that is a fact. The quality that we make in Australia is second to none, honestly. Like, we all are making amazing whiskey, and it's something that we should be really, really be proud of. You know, to be honest, it's just kind of nice to be back in the country talking to some mates about whiskey and having candid conversations about them. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, cracking.
100%.
Thanks for joining, Dave, and looking forward to having you in the store here as well for tasting later this month. We're gonna do a full Starwood expose, so really excited for that, man. Like,
expose. I like the word
expose. And where do we head? Johnny Holton, Transportation Whiskey, mate. Thank you for joining. What did you think of all the whiskies tonight and your thoughts?
Oh, bloody stunning. It was an awesome lineup. So, yeah, thank you very much for having me. Yeah, everything from that lovely little cocktail at the start all the way through. So I was very, very pleasantly surprised. Again, everyone, great to have a chat with everyone here as well. So that was really cool. So thank you very much for having me. And I can't wait to see you guys up there and get back to where I lived for a long time over there in Abbotsford.
Happy days, mate.
Can't wait to have you around again.
Yeah, really looking forward to having you over for Whiskey Abbey again and sharing some of these beautiful whiskies with everyone there. Lee, thanks so much for joining, brother, down in Yak. Been amazing to try the rye with everyone and learn a little bit more about Backwards.
Thanks, guys. It's always nice to slip a rye in, something a bit different too. And Johnny's with the pot still. It's it's good to get a couple of different things in and just again show the diversity and unreal. Like to taste a Starwood like that. I've never tasted a Starwood like that. I can't get enough of Tim's whiskey. It's bloody hard to get. It always sells out so quick. So that was really nice to taste that and to taste these Helliers that Dave's been with him and presenting this new packaging and new whiskies is just absolutely incredible. So thanks for thanks so much for having me as part of this lineup. I'm very chuffed to be amongst these great distillers and producers. It's awesome.
Yes, Lee. You absolutely found your own amongst this caliber, mate. You're above and beyond the whiskies you guys release. You're incredible and sing a great song of your locality and everything you're doing. Your love for Australian provenance and celebrating Australian farmers and producers is really incredible. So thanks, mate. And Tim, thanks so much for joining from down in Bishano. Beautiful spot in the world, and been amazing to try your whiskies tonight.
Yeah, cheers. Loved the conversation. It's awesome to reconnect with a couple of these guys as well. Like Dave, one of the early guys that I got in touch with, and that was generous enough to show us through Starwood probably 6 or 7 years ago before we even started a distillery. And so awesome to be, sitting amongst him now, chatting away as one of the royalties within Australia. And I loved you bringing up that point too, because it created some cool conversation, which I 100% agree with most of it. Would love to continue, and I also really enjoyed seeing the chat because there's some really good little inputs from guys like Dominic, Jason, Julian there, Dave, Troy, like all making really valid points to that argument. So yeah, but unfortunately we don't have 2 more hours up our sleeve, otherwise we could continue that on. But yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Cheers, Tim. Great to have had you, and amazing to see. I can't wait to see what you guys keep on producing in the future. And of course, Dave from Hell Is Our Road, thank you so much for joining, brother. It's been amazing to catch up with you again and try this World Whisky Award-winning single cask.
Yeah, pleasure, gents. Anytime for you guys, you know that. Even when I'm in Melbourne for 4 hours, I still make time to come see you. So if you come calling saying you want me to be part of a live stream, I'll be there even if I'm in the bush.
Well, John, this has been a very good tasting. Like, good conversation, good,
Been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of people joining online and on the YouTube as well. On a bit of Facebook too. Everyone's been giving lots of thumbs up. It's been a great chance to try some great whiskies. Dave B down in Tassie as well. Ed, Jason, Josh, David Till, Sonny, Owen, Richard, Andrew, Troy, Oz, Sarah, of course, from Starwood Distillery, who's been with us the whole length of the journey as well. Thank you so much for being part of the Zoom chat, and I hope you've really enjoyed it tonight. For me, this has been something I've been looking forward to for a long time, and it led up to expectations. Australian whiskey industry is utterly complex and phenomenal. It's a beautiful landscape, and to be able to do this tasting tonight, try such diverse styles against each other with such amazing people behind it, I think that's the most important thing for me. That's what makes the Australian whiskey industry so amazing.
And diverse.
Is everybody that's behind making these beautiful products.
And this gives me a very good idea to maybe do an open panel at Whisky Abbey and have chats about regionality, and it's
sounds like an idea. Maybe what is Australian whiskey? And we can do a panel at Whisky Abbey. So for those who haven't heard yet or haven't got a ticket, Whisky Abbey is obviously on again this year. It is every year, second weekend of November, and bigger and better this year. Lots of fun things planned. So we'd love to see as many of you there as possible.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for tonight. It's been an awesome night. And well, stay tuned. We'll have more of these.
Yeah. Lots of great things to come. If anybody wants to purchase one of the bottles from tonight, we've got available. You can use Aussie Whiskey, all in caps, on our website. That'll also get you 10% off any tastings we've got coming up and that sort of thing as well. But also make sure all of the guys that are in here tonight jump onto their social medias, their Facebooks, their Instagram and their websites. Follow them, buy their whiskies, because these are the guys that are really pioneering Australian whiskey on the world stage. And it's a pleasure to be able to try them all tonight and support as we move forward as well.
Okay, cheers everyone, and thank you.
Cheers,
thank you for tonight. I hope everyone has a good night, and we see each other maybe on the next
to sharing some more drams
online tasting.